Hello, hello, hello. Let's go look. New motivate story.
In the early years of the 20th century, the world was changing at a pace that seemed both exhilarating and terrifying. The Industrial Revolution had transformed human society from an agrarian to an urban economy. Steam engines, iron, and steel were no longer just for the wealthy or the military. They were the lifeblood of entire industries. Cities swelled with people eager to leave their farms behind and enter the new world of factories, clock towers, and assembly lines. In this rapidly evolving landscape, factories became the engines of progress. No longer did work depend on the rhythms of nature or the whims of local craftsmen. Instead, the factory floor was governed by precision and productivity. But with this new era came a profound shift in the nature of work itself. The sense of individual craft, pride, and skill that once accompanied manual labor was now being replaced by the cold precision of mass production. Workers now operated as cogs in a vast machine, each individual performing a small, repetitive task. The factory owners demanded ever greater efficiency, and the need for structure and discipline became paramount. Time was money, and no one understood this better than Frederick Winslow Taylor, a mechanical engineer and management consultant whose work would forever alter the relationship between labor and productivity. Taylor, often called the father of scientific management, introduced a system that aimed to optimize factory operations. His methods were rooted in the idea that efficiency could be measured, quantified, and maximized. Every task, from shoveling coal to turning screws, could be broken down into minute details, with each movement being measured for maximum productivity. Workers were expected to follow precise instructions, and time was tracked with the kind of rigidity that had previously only been applied to machinery itself. Taylor's philosophy was rooted in the belief that labor could be perfected just as machinery could. In his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, 1911, he outlined his vision for the future of industry, a world where human labor was guided by the same principles of optimization that governed the machines. He argued that workers should no longer be left to their own devices, choosing their pace and methods. Instead, the most efficient ways of performing a task should be determined scientifically by experts, and workers should be trained to follow these methods. Taylor's methods were not merely about getting more work out of people, but about eliminating waste in every form, whether it was time wasted in idle chatter or energy wasted in inefficient movements. In the new factory system, workers were given exact quotas and were paid based on their output. This system was supposed to be a fair trade. The more efficient a worker was, the more they could earn. It was a simple equation, motivation tied to external rewards, pay, efficiency, output. The factory became a space where personal skill was subordinated to the needs of the machine, and every minute of labor was scrutinized and optimized for maximum productivity. But there was a cost to this approach. As Taylor's methods spread across industries, a deeper question began to surface. What was lost in the pursuit of efficiency? Where did the human spirit go when work became nothing more than a series of mechanical tasks performed for pay? Taylor's system assumed that workers were inherently lazy and needed external rewards to stay productive. It ignored the complexities of human motivation, the intangible factors that fueled creativity, passion, and satisfaction in work. For all of its focus on maximizing productivity, Taylor's scientific management had a blind spot. It missed something essential about the human worker, the drive for purpose, autonomy, and fulfillment that went beyond mere external rewards. In the factories of the early 20th century, workers were often treated as interchangeable parts, no different from the machines they operated. The daily grind became a monotonous blur, hours spent in the same repetitive motions, day after day, with little room for personal expression or fulfillment. The factory floor became a space of alienation, where workers found themselves disconnected not only from the work itself, but from each other. Many workers did not fit neatly into the mold of the efficient machine Taylor had envisioned. Some were driven by a sense of pride in their work, while others had more personal or creative motivations. But in the pursuit of efficiency, these subtler motivations were often ignored or undervalued. For Taylor, the worker was an instrument in the grand machine of production, a tool to be sharpened and used in the pursuit of output. And while the system worked in terms of raw numbers, output increased and costs decreased, it failed to account for the broader human experience of labor. As the century progressed, critiques of Taylorism began to emerge. Social reformers, labor unions, and even some business leaders began to question the long-term effects of treating workers as mere instruments of productivity. There were stories of workers collapsing from exhaustion, of families being torn apart by the stresses of factory life, and of lives spent in endless toil for minimal reward. In the heart of the industrial landscape, a subtle but important shift began to take place. While Taylor's principles dominated the corporate world, a growing number of thinkers and workers alike began to recognize that human beings needed more than external rewards to be truly motivated. The rigid structures of scientific management, for all their efficiency, could not account for the emotional and psychological needs of the workers. The human element, the drive for meaning, fulfillment, and connection, was missing from the equation. The question of motivation in the workplace became a central issue in the early decades of the 20th century. Was productivity only a matter of external rewards, or could something deeper drive human work? Psychologists, sociologists, and philosophers began to grapple with the idea that the human worker was not a mere cog in the machine, but a person with unique desires, needs, and aspirations. One of the first to challenge Taylor's view was the American psychologist Hugo Münsterberg. In his book Psychology and Industrial Efficiency, 1913, Münsterberg argued that work could not be reduced to a simple formula of efficiency. Instead, he believed that understanding human behavior, what motivated people, how they thought, and how they felt, was essential to improving productivity in a way that was both humane and effective. Münsterberg proposed that workers could be more productive if they were placed in roles that suited their skills and interests. He stressed the importance of psychological testing in matching workers to jobs that would bring out their best abilities. Unlike Taylor, who believed in a one-size-fits-all approach to efficiency, Münsterberg recognized that human beings had a range of capabilities and desires that needed to be taken into account. In a similar vein, the work of Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne studies in the 1920s and 1930s began to highlight the importance of social and psychological factors in workplace motivation. Mayo's research found that workers were more motivated by factors like recognition, a sense of belonging, and supportive relationships with supervisors and colleagues than by simple financial incentives or rigid efficiency standards. These early studies laid the groundwork for what would later be known as the human relations movement. This movement sought to recognize and address the emotional and social needs of workers, offering a counterpoint to the mechanistic view of labor that Taylor had espoused. It was a recognition that while efficiency and productivity were important, they were not the only things that mattered. For workers to be truly motivated, they needed to feel valued, understood, and connected to the larger purpose of their work. As the industrial age marched on, the factory floor was not only a site of production, but also a battleground for ideas about human dignity, creativity, and fulfillment. The quest for motivation, it seemed, would not be satisfied by external rewards alone. The challenge now was to find a way to integrate the human spirit with the needs of the machine, an endeavor that would require not just scientific management, but empathy, understanding, and a deep respect for the workers who made the machines run. As the century progressed, the battle for workers' rights and better working conditions gained momentum. The industrial age, for all its advancements, had also created a labor force that was increasingly dissatisfied with the rigid and dehumanizing structure of factory life. While scientific management had increased efficiency, it had also stripped workers of their autonomy and individuality. For many, the factory floor had become a place where they were measured only by their output. Their value was reduced to a series of numbers: how many units they produced in a given period, how quickly they could perform repetitive tasks, and how efficiently they could meet their quotas. There was no room for personal expression or creativity, no room to step outside the mechanical rhythm of the workday. And as the factory system spread, so too did a growing sense of alienation among workers. The issue was not just the physical toll that factory work took, though that was significant, but also the psychological strain of being reduced to mere productivity. Workers were often treated as replaceable, interchangeable parts in an endless cycle of production. This fostered an environment where morale was low, and motivation came primarily from the carrot and stick approach. rewards for meeting targets and punishments for falling short. But something was beginning to change. The labor movement, which had been gaining traction throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, became a force to be reckoned with. Labor unions were formed to demand better wages, improved working conditions, and more humane treatment for workers. It wasn't just about the pursuit of higher wages. It was about the dignity and respect that workers were entitled to, about the recognition that they were more than just a means of production. The rise of labor unions coincided with a new wave of industrial philosophy. Thinkers, economists, and reformers began to argue that there had to be a better way to balance productivity with human needs. Workers needed more than just financial incentives. They needed a sense of purpose, fulfillment, and, perhaps most importantly, autonomy. A person who was given a modicum of control over their own work would be more motivated, more engaged, and more productive. Yet, this call for greater autonomy was met with resistance. The factory owners, while recognizing the value of a motivated workforce, still feared the loss of control. After all, the entire system of scientific management rested on the idea of a centralized, controlled work environment where every task was dictated, every minute accounted for. The notion of workers having a say in their work or pursuing tasks outside of the prescribed quotas seemed like a direct threat to the efficiency and order that had become so central to industrial life. By the 1930s, the conversation about work was changing. The Great Depression had deepened the divide between the working class and the elite, exposing the fragility of a system that prioritized profit over people. Workers, who had long been seen as mere components of the industrial machine, began to assert their humanity in ways that could no longer be ignored. The human relations movement, which had gained traction in the 1920s, became even more influential in the following decades. Leaders in the field of industrial psychology, like Elton Mayo, pushed for a broader understanding of motivation that included not just external rewards, but also internal satisfaction. They began to argue that productivity could not be measured solely in terms of output. It was just as important to consider how employees felt about their work and how they related to the organization as a whole. Mayo's work, especially the famous Hawthorne studies, was groundbreaking. His research at the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Chicago showed that workers were more motivated when they felt valued and respected by their employers. The studies revealed that factors like social connections with coworkers, positive feedback from supervisors, and even the simple act of paying attention to workers' needs could dramatically increase productivity. The realization was profound. Workers were not simply motivated by pay and quotas. They were driven by a need for recognition, connection, and a sense of belonging. This shift in thinking began to influence industrial practices. Rather than solely focusing on efficiency, businesses began to experiment with ways to foster a more humane work environment. In some cases, this meant providing workers with opportunities to participate in decision-making or offering them more control over how they completed their tasks. In other cases, it meant improving working conditions, introducing regular breaks, and promoting a sense of community within the workplace. However, these changes were slow and uneven. The traditional factory system was deeply ingrained in the industrial mindset, and many factory owners remained skeptical of the human relations movement. They feared that giving workers too much autonomy would lead to inefficiency, strikes, or even a breakdown in discipline. Still, the seeds of change had been planted. Workers were beginning to ask for more than just a paycheck. They were demanding a voice in their work, their lives, and their future. As the 20th century drew to a close, the dynamics of work continued to evolve. The rapid rise of technology and the shift toward a more globalized economy transformed the nature of work in ways that even the most forward-thinking industrialists could not have predicted. Automation, computers, and the digital revolution changed the landscape of work again, but the core issue of human motivation remained central. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the traditional factory model continued to be replaced by more flexible and dynamic work environments. Many companies adopted models that focused on employee engagement and well-being. It became clear that for businesses to thrive in the long term, they had to recognize the value of motivated, satisfied workers, not just in terms of output, but in terms of their emotional and psychological fulfillment. The rise of the knowledge economy further highlighted the need for a new approach to motivation. Workers in industries like technology, finance, and consulting were often tasked with complex, creative work that required more than just following a set of instructions. These employees needed autonomy, opportunities for personal growth, and a sense of purpose. The mechanistic model of work that had dominated the industrial era was no longer sufficient for the needs of the modern workforce. Today, companies recognize that motivation is a multifaceted concept that cannot be reduced to external rewards alone. While pay and benefits remain important, businesses increasingly focus on creating environments where employees feel empowered, connected, and valued. Flexibility, work-life balance, professional development, and a sense of purpose have become integral parts of the modern work experience. However, the lessons of the industrial age remain ever relevant. As automation and artificial intelligence continue to shape the future of work, it is more important than ever to ensure that the human element is not lost. Just as workers once struggled against the dehumanizing forces of mass production, so too must modern workers and employers grapple with the complexities of motivation in an age where machines are capable of performing tasks once thought to require human ingenuity. The journey from the industrial age to the modern world of work has been long and complex. It has been a journey of both progress and struggle, of technological advancements, social movements, and a continual reevaluation of what it means to be human in a world increasingly shaped by machines. The quest for meaning, fulfillment, and motivation in the workplace is ongoing. And though the specifics may change, the underlying truth remains. For people to be truly productive, they must be more than mere instruments of industry. They must be seen as whole human beings, capable of both great output and great creativity. The challenge, as it always has been, is finding a way to honor both.